SOC analysts are unsung heroes. The SOC Analyst Appreciation Day Awards program recognizes analysts who go above and beyond the call of duty and handle their pressure-packed jobs exceptionally well. SOC leaders nominate your top-performing team members to show them just how much you appreciate everything they do to thwart cybercrime. DIVA will award analysts during this year's SOC Analyst Appreciation Day events on October 19th. You have until September 6th to get your nominations in. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to learn more. Every hack follows the same pattern. First, hackers exploit a human error, like a leaked key or a secret left in code. They gain a foothold and then pivot, moving from one compromised system to the next. Teleport breaks this cycle. Open source Teleport gives every engineer, every piece of hardware, every application an identity, replacing secrets like passwords and keys with auto-expiring identity-based certificates. Learn why most visionary businesses in the world choose Teleport at securityweekly.com/teleport.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Obviously, if you haven't gotten your nominations in for SOC Analyst Appreciation Day, that deadline was September 6th, and it's now September 14th. The deadline is come and gone. Let's see, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to any of our podcasts and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list Discord server, follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Don't forget, going to securityweekly.com/subscribe also gives you access to our episode starter packs, collections of Spotify playlists that are further collections of our favorite episodes. So make sure you check out all of that at securityweekly.com/subscribe. On to the news for this week. What do you see? You guys want to just start like at number one and work our way through? Try something different? All right, let's do that. Oh, my God. Lexmark firmware update to fix Windows bug and a vulnerability. Now, I thought this was super confusing. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I wasn't creative enough. But this vulnerability says, a quote is, there's a vulnerability in older firmware versions that allows an attacker to modify the internal configuration files. However, this assumes that the attacker has already compromised the device and is therefore able to change the configuration files. In this case, there would be a risk of making this compromise permanent, so after rebooting, it would remain compromised. Am I the only one struggling with you change a configuration file and it somehow...
So are they writing to the firmware the default config firmware file? Because if you change the config, then the config is changed, and thus it saves after reboot. So,
well, if you change it in NVRAM, it would persist reboots, conceivably, unless traditionally. And again, the answer in firmware is always it depends. That depends. If you push the reset button on a device, what that does is read NVRAM defaults from a different region of the flash chip, right? And write that to the NVRAM region, so basically resetting all of your settings. So I wasn't quite sure. I just think there's not enough information. Because there was other stuff in, the Lexmark had, a PDF where they described a read-only file system and in persisting reboots. I'm like, how does... Unless I was really... the attack vector here was super confusing. Yeah, I just don't think there's enough information.
And then there's a chicken and egg. If you already compromised the device, then what's the point?
But how do you... So then, you're being creative. How do I compromise a device through configuration files? Maybe there's a command injection in a configuration file? So I update a configuration file, it can execute a command, and then...
Yeah, it was something in jQuery that was doing it after, skimming through the PDF and some of the announcements. There's a vulnerability in jQuery, which... obviously is interacting with how the command takes and parses the input. So, I can see how maybe remotely that could be a problem. But again, it says you have to have compromised the device. So
the other thing was weird.
They're not real clear.
Lexmark firmware is stored in a compressed read-only file system that is continuously integrity checked as programs are loaded into RAM for execution. That makes sense. Typically, when you package firmware for any kind of embedded type device, you've got a read-only file system. Usually, it's actually to save space. But in this case, they're saying, there's integrity because it's read-only file system. It shouldn't change, so the integrity checks should enforce that, right? But then they say this means if a device is somehow compromised, a reboot should clear the issue from the device. I guess so, because you're not modifying that. I mean, but again, it depends.
But they're saying the vulnerability allows.
If I can give you a new if I have access to the flash in a running Lexmark device, let's just say, I can give you a new SquashFS file system and a new integrity check if I control what's being written to the flash device, and then my hack is still going to persist, and it's not going to clear the issue because I'm going to give you my issues, basically, right? No, I thought it was weird.
Yeah,
it doesn't sound persistent since you can reboot it. So I mean,
it says it modifies the internal configuration file, making the compromise persistent. That was literally what it says.
Well, yeah, I know it says that, but it also says that if you reboot it,
how is that read only? And how is this in RAM?
Well, because typically the configuration file is stored in a separate region from the read-only file system. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like the firmware gets unpacked when it boots up. Usually there's a bootloader on the SPI flash that unpacks the firmware and writes the read-only file system. That's why I'm like in a configuration. I don't understand how the configuration file.
It's not a configuration file. It has to be
persistent.
The flash.
You could change the configuration file to introduce a vulnerability, and that vulnerability wouldn't go away, right?
Maybe jQuery is interacting with the hardware in a very specific manner that allows that modification to that read-only system once it's executed in memory.
Or maybe it reads a file that's referenced by the configuration file.
Well,
so if the configuration file pointed to something else when it starts reading, it still wouldn't be permanent because you could always go change the configuration file and reboot.
Well, permanent's always air quotes.
Well, no, it is, and so, but I'm wondering if it is one of those kind of things where something in the config file is accessed as it's loading, and it reads that file to get information, and then that points it to the wrong place, and then it pulls something in that could be a vulnerability. I mean,
a lot of possibilities here.
Yeah, and they don't really tell you.
No,
they just say it's bad.
Yeah,
so one of those.
Oh, speaking of bad, let's talk about GIFShell. Or is it GIFShell?
You mean GIF? I mean, I'm just kidding.
GIFShell.
Just kidding.
Say GIF.
I don't care what they say.
Yeah, settle down.
Doug is going to say it wrong.
I'm going to say it wrong no matter what.
No matter what. And Doug's going to make sure of that. GIFShell attack creates a reverse shell using Microsoft Teams GIFs. Now, I want to get my soapbox here for a moment and just say I learned today that Microsoft is dropping support for Teams on Linux just when I got it working really well on 2 of my systems. I'm like, amazingly, I don't want to say this out loud, but like Teams is working actually pretty good. Like the actual Teams client on Linux. And one of the comments on Twitter was, Teams runs really crappy on Windows. I can't imagine running it on Linux. Like 100%, dude, 100%. But they're dropping support in favor of the applications that run inside of a browser. What are those called?
Browser apps?
Yeah, I was going to say, but I was like, no, it can't be that.
That's what I called them, but there's a...
In-browser apps, yeah.
There's a name.
There's a technical term.
There's a technical term. Thank you.
Oh, I thought that was in-browser apps.
Yes. Nope. The technical term, progressive web apps.
Oh, that term, yeah.
Progressive web apps.
That's what I always
And I read
them.
progressive web apps. I'm like, wait, what is...
Quaz.
I'm like, oh, those are the stupid little apps that run inside of your browser.
They use the browser window.
Which I hate because you can't really install them. I don't think you can install them from the command line.
No.
Because I'm like
working... They have to have a browser window. Yeah,
I'm working on this script that like sets up my Linux systems the way I want them set up and installs stuff the way I want it set up because there's at least 8 different ways to install an application on Linux. And I picked one and I'm like, I want it my way. And now I can't do that for Teams because there's no longer a deb package for Teams. And I had just written the script that would install the deb package from Teams from Microsoft repositories. But then after reading this advisory, I don't want to run Teams at all anymore, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this can be done with anything, though. Like this is a novel approach, and one of the interesting bits about this is that any user inside of Windows can actually read these log files that exist in app data.
Well, that was one of the 7. That was one of the 7 vulnerabilities and/or flaws that was disclosed by whoever did the research, whose name escapes me.
Yeah. I mean, they're essentially taking a base
Bobby Brouch
image, putting the commands within inside of that. That gets stored to a log. The log ingests. You can actually set up cross-tenancy communication if your organization allows that, which by default it does. So the external communication by default, you can communicate between organizations and teams via Microsoft tenancy, and so it's all going across Microsoft's infrastructure, and thus avoiding any malicious URL scanning, anything it's going to get past basically all your next gen firewalls, all your next gen WAFs, all the things that are looking at that traffic.
And even saying that, Tyler, you don't sound impressed at all.
I'm not. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. Like Team C2 has been a thing, Slack C2. Like this is just another means in which we've done it. We've done it with bots. We've done it with images. We've done it with search queries. We've done it with Google Translation stuff.
But
so,
storing the chat logs in clear text that's that any user can read. It's not even like you got to be administrator. Like your user can read those chat logs. It's in the context of the user. Anything you've typed into Teams is stored in clear text in a log file. I thought that was bad.
We'll say that there are many kits that leverage that in order to compromise and grab information from machines once they've been compromised. So as with any communication platform, Slack, like you can export a lot of Slack stuff. You can do searches against channels that aren't private that you don't belong to and get all of the information and communication inside of those. So this is not new again.
But why isn't Microsoft fixing it?
Communications.
Microsoft said this type of phishing is important to be aware of, and as always, we recommend users use good practice computing habits online, including exercising caution when clicking on links to web pages, opening unknown files, or accepting file transfers. I mean, if that was the case, why would we fix any vulnerabilities? Seriously.
I mean, that's just because once you're compromised, then your teams can be leveraged for C2. Like that's the stager's job, is to execute code so that you get implanted and then your C2 is running across teams.
So wait, you side with Microsoft on this? You don't think they should fix it?
I mean, they should definitely probably not make those clear text, but they shouldn't be readable by any user. Clear text is probably not great, but we'll say most communication apps on your desktop has the ability to have those chats extracted from a database, whether it's clear text or not. So the key exists with inside of your user context.
We also have the ability to embed malicious commands inside of Gifs, but is that only an exploitation vector if the logs are written the way they are?
No. Well,
I thought that's how the
yes, because the computer has to be able to retrieve the logs in order to base64 decode that GIF call in order for the C2 to work.
Yeah.
But again, like you could post a message to Teams and leverage that same ability, the Teams API, Teams call and API commands, and leverage the exact same thing. Like we've used Teams for C2 for a while. So it's just a different portion of writing that base64 to a log that's clear text that any user can get. So you're able to store those wherever. That's makes it a little bit more interesting.
What you're saying is use Google Meets.
Yeah, go ahead and use Google.
No, that's not good either. Tyler's not. Now you're laughing at people that use Google.
No, I mean, we use Slack, we use Google, we use Teams. Like anything can be used as
a C2. Yeah, I got
you. Will be used as C2. Anything that stores data and can communicate across tenancy.
This very nature makes it that
high fidelity, right?
It's meant to communicate.
So it does. It's just all how you use it.
I got you.
Everything has an API now. That's the great part about this new fantastic web next gen internet that we're leveraging. Everything can be done with API calls, and that allows very programmatic ways of communicating, whether that's stealthy or not.
So what you're saying is it's like Shakata Ga Nai.
Yeah.
Which is Japanese for nothing can be done about it. Which is a great segue into our next story. Well, I nailed that one.
Wow. Dude.
I'm just doing a little pat on the back. I had totally forgotten about Shakata Ga Nai. I vividly remember John Strand explaining it to me. Like using it and then like asking John, like, if I had to explain this to someone else, and like him like going into his SANS instructor mode because he had taught the same Metasploit class that I was teaching, and just going, oh yeah, this is how you explain it. And I'm like, oh yeah. I don't remember what the explanation is, but
it allows you to like layer, obfuscate, and evade most of the protections by programmatically making malware more sophisticated.
It is. I just want to state, Tyler, because I've been very excited about this moment where I get to say this. It's a polymorphic XOR additive feedback encoder.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a polymorphic encoder. Right? Like that's all it really is.
Polymorphic XOR additive feedback encoder, to be precise.
Not just an additive. It's
Say that 5 times fast.
I mean, again, there's a billion of these out there, and the way in which you do it, this one has just been very public because it's pretty good at evading.
This is just a very sophisticated one.
But the high level is like we say the big long, polymorphic XOR additive feedback encoder. I mean, essentially what this is doing is modifying a piece of code and or like object file, essentially, right? Or even binary, modifying it such that it does the same exact thing, however, has a different signature. So modifying white space, swapping out functions that do the exact same thing, but it's just a different function, adding junk in to certain parts code that doesn't do anything.
Ring. Yeah, I mean it encodes and decodes stuff. I mean basically, and adds garbage in places that
not just garbage,
but it adds all kinds of things, changes things,
and to have this function be the same but the signature be different.
I mean it's basically it's like encryption, only it's like a different function. I mean it's the same kind of idea though. It's like I want to make this as hard to read as possible, so that but it has to still be usable.
Right.
Yeah, and you have to make, so if you're going to do encoding, right, you have an encoding and decoding, and the problem with encoding and decoding is you can always decode that as an AV, so you have to be able to dynamically make those encoded, but you have to be able to decode that on the machine that you're infecting, which becomes a problem if you're not, leveraging some known key or known keying
some kind of
algorithm.
Seed, yeah. Is it really a key or a seed? Sometimes it's like a seed, more like a seed than a key, right?
Yeah, so you're building this dropper. You're essentially adding a PE header into there for your shellcode to create an entry point for that shellcode to execute that has the decoding XOR function that is dynamically, polymorphic, which just means it can dynamically change and gets set up so that they can't build a signature on it based on the algorithm that they're using without overbloating and overcomplicating a piece of shellcode that has to fit into usually something else like a dropper or a small a VBA script or Python or whatever you're using to actually inject and execute code on the infected device.
I'm trying to think this is a good exercise for like an intern or someone getting in the field. Like what was the first papers on polymorphic shellcode? Was it not LF1? It was, I can't think of it now. This is going way back in history, but I started to think about this when we were talking about polymorphic in feedback encoders, right? Like Shakata Ga Nai. And I was like, what were the early papers? What were the dates on the early papers that led to, because Shakata Ga Nai was just obviously like the name they gave to this specific implementation. The technique has been around prior to this. So what I did was I went back in the Metasploit GitHub repository and I looked at the original commit date for the Shakata Ga Nai encoder. It turns out that was December 29th, 2005.
Yeah, I was going to say 05.
Yep.
It was
so
way back.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's just when it landed in Metasploit. The technique had been that these in similar techniques were 90 something. Yeah. Agreed. I don't pretend to know which.
Monero. So the problem with this is that now you're one of the things that you've been relying on for, if you're not using multi-layer, you're relying on a single EDR platform or signature-based detection and not behavior, and you don't have a good baseline. These are the things that many of the attackers have moved to so that they don't have to be dynamically spending so much time on payload generation, obfuscation, and evasion. Like evasion takes a ton of time to build a good payload. Like you're talking some sophisticated places, it's a week to 2 weeks. You talk about AMSI bypasses and having to get all your staging right, get your droppers pointed in the right place, obfuscate all that. You burn that, that's a pain in the ass. So you end up having all of this time put in, and so you need to actually get this right so that you can deploy all these payloads and not have them caught once one thing signatures on it. It's dynamic, so not everything signatures. So then they can do the stuff like Monero mining. And that's what we've seen a lot of the mining start to kick up on.
Also, so Tyler, where I thought you were going with this too is that like what's old is new again, and modern detection of malware and payloads has this kind of like finite time. I'm trying to find like a fancy way to describe it, but that's out the window. So like basically the older techniques aren't being included in the modern detection software. Only the newer stuff is. So like endpoint detection is going, I can detect all this new stuff, but they're kind of doing that, but like in favor of the newer stuff. In the older stuff, they're like, oh, I don't detect that anymore because that polymorphic shellcode has been around for 30 years plus, and somehow like the older stuff has dropped off of my detection in favor of all the newer mechanisms that are being developed. So like it's hard to maintain a full catalog. If we go back and use a Meterpreter from 2005 or whenever, when it was Meterpreter, I didn't backdate Meterpreter, but like if you used an old encoding, an old like the Shakata Ga Nai from 2005 is going to give you different code in a different signature than the Shakata Ga Nai gives you today. So like, you know, CrowdStrike, I had to pick on CrowdStrike, like whatever endpoint detection is going to go, oh, I don't detect that anymore.
You got to prioritize. They're prioritizing what's on the endpoint and what can be scanned. Then they have the cloud delivery where that's getting sent up, dynamically being evaluated from a behavioral analysis technique in a larger library of scanning engines to look at those. And then, you've got some of the older stuff dropping off, but really this is just a different spin on the dynamic ways that shellcode is loaded. And again, that's very difficult unless you're doing behavioral analysis. So you're hopefully relying on other things at the network level. Like a interpreter should not get out. Your firewall should see command and control. They should see outbound connections. You should have a proxy there getting the visibility. You're getting stuff from your URL and IP space for new IPs, new communication, new user accounts, doing things they shouldn't be. So the behavioral piece is getting better, and there's a lot of EDRs and security vendors doing that better, but that's relying on multiple stages of that defense in depth posture, whereas this is just able to get around EDR and maybe some of the AMC, or this is specific to Linux. This article is talking about.
This is specific to the Shakata malware. Is it Shakata? I linked to the Bleeping Computer, but make sure you go read AT&T's report on this particular malware, which describes it in excruciating detail. Also, the other thing,
they do a good job.
They do. The other interesting thing about this was that it also, so the payload that gets on there is like a first stage loader, and then to escalate privileges, they're using PwnKit, which was the PaulKit local privilege escalation vulnerability in Linux the Qualys team found, which you should have patched already, but in any case.
But
Lee is here. What's up,
I'm
Lee?
joining you guys. How about that? I was saying, didn't I read that this guy was also targeting IoT Linux or other, embedded, such that those protections like EDR just aren't there? I mean, obviously, if you've got perimeter protections, you should be catching the CNC. But I'm thinking there's a pretty big set of potential clients if you start looking at the IoT, particularly non-corporate, to try and get footholds. And maybe you could lateral into somebody's work from home system to have a little more fun.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's the interesting part. I'm wondering if IoT, if they're getting enough of these that the mining makes sense, because IoT is a very small processing and compute power. And so really the Monero doesn't take as much power as something like, Bitcoin or a couple of the other mining, that proof of work, proof of stake kind of separation there, but still the quantity has to be going into this rather than the quality of what the mining is doing to go after IoT.
Yeah, I mean, also
unless you're just going to take the IoT and use it for lateral until you find something with a bit more horsepower that's nearby, and then go to town. I mean, didn't I hear somewhere that one of the NAS vulnerabilities is being used for mining as well?
Yep. And for lateral movement for worming.
Oh God!
Was that
really?
QNAP? Was it QNAP?
This one, the last one, I
probably.
believe, was QNAP. Yep. But there was a Synology one before that too. So.
Yeah.
And then a Drobo one before that.
It's interesting though. If you're targeting IoT or embedded systems, do you even really need to use polymorphic shellcode? Because the chances that there's even going to be anything on the system,
IoT,
right?
I would think that's hard to see.
IoT probably not. Linux, maybe like some clam AV stuff. I don't know, like what people usually run for default Linux EDR.
Yeah. Well, if I was going after Paul's thermostat, I wouldn't necessarily need polymorphic, but if I was going after Paul's desktop, I'd need every trick I got.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean
it's just those IoT things are so much smaller. I don't see the need, and I'm not sure you could do it. It's going to take up too much of it. It's going to be obvious.
Capsulate's actually really good on Linux systems. I wish they'd actually. I probably should be running that on my desktop, to be honest with you, because that's looking at more behavior too.
Right.
Than trying to develop signatures for shellcode, right? Transitioning to JavaScript, a vulnerability in the TikTok Android app could lead to one-click hijacking. So this was in the app's deep link verification. Attackers could force the app to load an arbitrary URL in the app's web view, allowing the URL to then access web views attached JavaScript bridges, grant functionality to attackers. So this is like in the TikTok app, you give them a link, the link exploits a vulnerability, and you get like JavaScript through the bridging function, access to that JavaScript environment to be able to steal their credentials. I would love
to know if anybody's scanned for all of the links that have been dropped in TikTok that have potentially vulnerable JavaScript code or malicious JavaScript code. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever looked at JavaScript and all the shit that runs and gets loloaded by JavaScript.
Oh my God, it's
I tried to do a diff on just a jQuery library, and
good luck.
I can't. Like, I don't understand how there can be any security with JavaScript based on all the things that it has access to in the browser and that it can do that you just don't even know. And it can load from anywhere.
Yep.
It doesn't even validate that it's the same library. It has the same dates on it, the same headers, and you get into the code, and there's differences in every version that I found on multiple websites.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a nightmare. JavaScript
that's a supply chain nightmare right in of itself.
Yeah,
100%.
Right, because so many and we had who was the sponsor that came on the show that was sandboxing JavaScript in your application?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What was? Oh God, name escapes me. They need to do this for the TikTok app.
Yep. Honestly, like JavaScript is one of the few scary things that like there's no good answer, and even the libraries themselves and the open source, like verifying all that code that's getting loaded and pushed to multiple websites and versions from different vendors, like no one's looking at that. That's a supply chain that will and is getting compromised. Obviously, it is getting compromised. We've been saying it should be getting compromised. Like, just no one has the ability to look at it. I don't see a good way to do that.
Even just the development cycle on JavaScript is like always as fast as possible. Just grab everything you can, and they're always pulling in things that pull in other things that pull in other things, and it just turns into this giant snake pit because it's very essence is that it's supposed to be quick and rapid development, and then it can do anything. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I agree with Tyler. I don't think anybody's looking at it from the supply chain risk. I know that the browser manufacturers have been working on improving the security in their JavaScript engines. I mean, some of the Chrome updates have been just about that. So they're doing what they can, but they're not at the holistic whole where you are, Tyler. I think they're more at the prevent it from doing as much bad stuff as they can locally, but they can't fix, make sure all the code's cool.
How are they doing that? Like, are they just using functions? Like, I looked at this last version of JavaScript, and I was trying to figure out like this was a malicious JavaScript that loaded in something I was looking at, and there's even obfuscation in there. Like, you can see functions that are changing and programmatically referencing different hooks and different function calls, and they've just modified all of those. So is there obfuscation in there that allows the bypass inside the browser? Like, we're talking about polymorphic code at the shellcode level and execution. That's fairly trivial to identify in comparison to this with inside the JavaScript code. There's just thousands and thousands of lines of code that just makes no sense that you can't follow anywhere.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Source defense. It was source defense.
But Apple's going to fix that because they're killing passwords. There's your transition.
I did want to say one thing on the JavaScript thing is that I like the fix, using an approved list of trusted domains that can be loaded into the application's web view to prevent loading malicious or untrusted web content. I don't know how feasible that is, especially in an app like TikTok.
Not going to work.
Yeah.
It sounds good, and it makes common sense. But the minute you do that, half the stuff you've got is going to break
working.
because it's just going to be
then,
like.
and what if the app is malicious or the website that you go to is malicious, and they're loading the JavaScript itself from their website? You've already approved it by allowing your
And
browser
it's going to be like that old Internet Explorer thing on Windows Server, where you just constantly had to approve every single thing until you didn't even know what you were approving anymore because it blocked so many things that only the pre-approved domain could run, and then even Microsoft site wouldn't run. And you just okay, and until you just go forget it. I'm just going to go for it.
Well, you really this isn't an end user thing. This has to be like a layer 7 firewall thing that's managed centrally, and that works great until I've approved Tyler's app. Oh, somebody got there and dorked up Tyler's stuff. Until that indication gets changed, everybody can run it, even though I'm only allowed apps. But you can reduce the risk.
You can reduce.
But I certainly wouldn't want app approval, at least in a corporate environment, at the end user point. That could go so wrong so fast.
Yeah. My story number 5 is basically Apple's using WebAuthn, which is essentially like SSH keys, but for web apps. Next story. I mean, that's really what it is. I think Diffie and Hellman should be proud, man. Like, this is basically public key cryptography, but applied to logging into all of the websites, and rather than username and password, I think too, like it sounded to me, and I'm not the world's foremost expert
sounds like
on
Apple went straight from like their FIDO thing that they did to making it amplified FIDO, right? Like they've gentrified the FIDO single sign-on.
FIDO, I love that.
It was developed by FIDO, but I don't know how FIDO compliant it is. It probably has some Apple flair to it.
Well, they probably don't care. They're just like
Applified it.
Amplified it. I like that. Amplified FIDO. Say that. But polymorphic amplified.
But
FIDO.
I think you get a different public key for each application. It's not the same public key that go like the way that this was describing it. And again, I haven't read the entire WebAuthn spec, but it sounds like there is a cryptographic means to generate a public key, the same private key but different public. I don't think it's stored in the key pair. I think it's one private key and multiple public keys.
That's what I read. It was generating a key pair, and it was different for every single thing.
Was the pair different? The private keys? So you get multiple private keys?
I think they were different. Yeah, they were generated on the fly. No, they were
Right.
they were multiple private keys, and they're generated on the fly.
That's specific for you to log into a site.
Yeah, and I don't think they persist either. They're just like session based.
So it is FIDO.
It is FIDO.
It is FIDO. Yeah, I mean, it is really.
They just had to call it something new so that everybody adopted it because now it's.
Oh no, Apple had to call it passkey. Yeah, and passkeys are basically just WebAuthn and FIDO.
Just WebAuthn tokens.
Right.
It works the same way as FIDO, but it's just.
So this is getting the general public on board with what they did with Microsoft and the FIDO Alliance and making it Google, Microsoft, and Apple.
It is a key pair. So it's a key pair. The keys generated by your device is securely and uniquely for every account.
Right.
So it's a separate key pair, private and public.
And I thought it said it was per session, so it was a unique key all the time. So every time you log in, it's your device. There's a piece of your device is being used to generate that key pair,
right.
and so it's a way to make everything unique.
So WebAuthn says it's instead of a password, private public key pair known as a credential is created for a website. Private key is stored securely on the user's device, and the public key and randomly generated credential ID is sent to the server for storage.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Right. Server can then use the public key to prove the user's identity.
Yeah.
Therefore, eliminating the need for a password, except for the password to protect your private key. If that's a, do you fingerprint? Does it fingerprint?
I thought it said biometrics, so I'm guessing it uses our face ID or something that they've got on the phone already. So, and I haven't had a chance to look at it. I installed that iOS, the new version that's got this in it, but I haven't actually set it up yet.
So again, you don't attack the actual FIDO or the cryptology. You attack the library that's providing the translation from face or biometric into the key.
Yep,
correct.
Well, is it a biometric translation, or if you got a key store and the biometric is just unlocking it?
The biometric is just unlocking the key store would be my guess, Lee. That's typically how it works.
Yeah.
That library, though, with biometrics, that's usually a library that interacts to translate whatever that is to the key store.
And we all know libraries have memory corruption, use after free type vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you're basically you're saying go after the gatekeeper that's protecting those keys, however it's implemented, and as opposed to breaking the biometric or something else.
Or hopefully trust Google, Apple, and Microsoft to do a good job of protecting their web authentication API and the web auth infrastructure backend for all of that validation.
I didn't think you did comedy,
Yeah,
Tyler.
because supply chain is awesome in these things. We should probably ask Paul about supply chain vulnerabilities in believing that Apple and Microsoft are going to protect you.
Well,
heaven forbid all those run on some cloud hardware that has a compromised BMC that
a default password.
Apple's an interesting one. I haven't looked into, like, now I'm curious with respect to supply chain. Like, you have to just trust what Apple does because they release so little information about how it all works. But in like the M1's case, it's even less documented because it's not an Intel chipset. Like, I can tell you on Intel chipsets, various PCHs and CPUs, how the EFI works, how they protect the BIOS, which is my next one, right? Because it's fairly well documented, not great, but there is documentation out there. When it comes to Apple's M1, I'm like, so where's the data sheet on, and I haven't looked, but like, do they have a data sheet on how their chipset or PCH works and how they're protecting their BIOS? I bet you that information just is not public at all, and you just have to trust that the really super smart firmware security engineers that they hired in 2016, one of which is left, have done a good job. Now, we haven't seen any, I don't think we've seen any firmware-related vulnerabilities with respects to like UEFI or BIOS level since then. And I think the reason for that is Apple hired a couple of the smartest people in that field since then, and then came out with M1 like years later. So, and also the iOS platform is super hard to break, and that's got similar types of technology to make sure all that stuff is validated, and you can't overwrite the firmware and stuff like that. So I find all that interesting.
The chip was built from the ground up with security in mind, Paul. They're not going to make any of the same mistakes that any of the other chip vendors have made over decades of experience and learning and supply chain issues.
I don't know. I think there's some validity to that, though, because if they looked at Intel's architecture and went, if we're going to do our own, we don't want the same security vulnerabilities, they actually do have a leg up because they're only putting their chip in their own hardware. Intel has to produce chips that run in all manufacturers' hardware and have to maintain backwards compatibility with a whole bunch of hardware as well. So I'm not saying they designed a perfectly secure chip. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But conceivably,
maybe they could
do a better job. They could do a better job because they're only making that chip for one platform. And man, like you've got an advantage security-wise.
I mean, they control all the hardware on that platform.
That's what I'm saying.
So I mean, and I agree.
They've got a simpler model that they have.
It's an easier task. Let's put it that. Doesn't mean you do it well, but it's an easier task.
As I learned this week, Intel has bits in there that you can set, and then in future revisions of the chipset, introduce newer bits that you can set in addition to the older bits that you can set. So eventually you have to have this like friggin' matrix of, well, if this bit's set and this bit's not set, that means it's vulnerable in this way. If none of the bits are set, you're really screwed and it's super vulnerable. But if this bit is set and this bit is set on this particular version and implementation of the chipset, then you're good. But if this is other thing, like it depends. Like the answer just is
those
like
trees are very deep.
I've seen the tree. Actually, Zeno Kova is one of those researchers that was one of the authors behind Speed Racer vulnerability for BIOS write protections, and went to work for Apple, and now does his own training and stuff like that. Which
I really hope
awesome.
Whoever comes up with the first one calls it like Appleseed or something like that.
I mean, that's a big ask too, because again, there's not as much documentation. Like you could, in Intel's case, find this documentation in manufacturers that have done implementations and left some more stuff open, have left some documentation out there. Like in Apple's case, they control the whole supply chain, including a lot of the information around it. So like Apple's not OEMing it to someone that produced a white paper or a binary on how to, to flash the BIOS that you can reverse engineer to go, oh, that's how it works. Apple controls everything, which is, again, like a double-edged sword, man. Like, so like back to the supply chain issue you're bringing up, like you basically just got to trust it. Apple's got that nailed down.
Well, the question you asked earlier, do we trust Microsoft, Google, Apple? We trust them to try and implement security. Whether it's
we trust they have more money
is the harder question. I do believe they're committed to implementing a level of security. I just don't. The is it good enough question is the one that makes it harder for me to give you a straight answer.
I think
the question is there money good enough? Is their money better than what we can do with our own money?
Oh, I'd say yes.
Yeah, they have a lot more money to throw at the problem. So
they have more money and they have more proprietary knowledge that can be very helpful in solving these problems.
Yeah, but money and resources is one of the things that doesn't derive trust. To me, trust is something you can validate and verify.
That's a bell curve. Like, right? I believe with more money you can throw more resources and more technology at a problem, but at a certain point that bell curve return on investment.
But that doesn't mean I implicitly trust it. I trust it if trust implies that there should be some kind of verification and or validation in a way to do that. Therefore, I trust it. So in Apple's case, there's not a whole lot I can do to validate or verify because all of the information is proprietary. I mean, it's like an encryption algorithm. I trust an encryption algorithm because it's been public for a number of years before people start using it. Therefore, that speaks pretty highly in the carries a lot of weight in the trust equation. And
I mean, as soon as we get this certified by Eclipsium hardware trust of chain stamp that validates all of this and has a third party do it, then maybe we'll get there.
Exactly my point. You got to be able to. So I have a new framework laptop. And I'll
tell us about this new framework laptop. How do you like it?
So being the nerd I am and where I work, I was like, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test all the firmware. I'm like, how did you guys do with firmware? Now, framework folks, if you're listening, I give you an A+ so far on your firmware. Like, I don't know that you could have done a better job from everything I've evaluated so far. Like, they've done... So I ran it through all of my validation tests for BIOS write protection, Intel ME, Secure Boot, which is my blog post series I've been working on. I mean... I'll go so far as to say is they passed with flying colors so far. The things that they left out are, some of them are areas for future research, but they did a great job on the firmware side. So I applaud them for that. I've got some things that we might want to chat about later, and you might see a message from me about some things we might want to chat about. But certainly a lot more secure than a lot of other manufacturers that I've evaluated, like hands down.
MSI? Come on, Paul.
Oh my God, MSI is all right. That's the opposite end of the spectrum that we're talking about. I apologize to people from MSI listening, but you should give your users some more firmware updates. Like, just put it that way.
At any point in time.
The conversation for another time, maybe next week. But like, there's stuff that I can observe as a user that's vulnerable and misconfigured that either I can't change, or if I change, won't have any effect on the system, or I could brick my own system. And I'm relying, speaking of supply chain, Josh, I'm relying on you, hardware and or BIOS manufacturer, to come up with those updates because you're part of the supply chain and to fix those issues, which is interesting. But with respect to the framework, I put Ubuntu 22.04 on it, and I love it, man. Like,
is there anything that doesn't work that you found so far?
Stuff is working. I'm kind of hard pressed to find something that like really doesn't work. I plugged the DisplayPort module in and connected it to an external monitor, expecting not great results. And I got 1440p on my external monitor. I closed the lid, and it recognized that and just worked.
Justin's been using this for almost a year now, maybe a year and a half, to do all of his teaching in class and presentations, like Black Hat Network, DEF CON Network, all the projectors. It seems to work great. They don't have an i9. Like, I'm a little disappointed there, but that's
I don't know. The 1280p is pretty solid, man. It's pretty solid. It's 6 plus 8 cores. So you get 14 cores total, and I forget if it's the set of 6 or 8 that are used for power balancing. Like some of them are like lower power cores, so they don't eat up all your battery, kind of thing. So the speed has been great. Ubuntu support has been spectacular. I mean, my one issue with Ubuntu is I pick a way to install a friggin' application. And this is Linus Torvalds' issue with Linux. The guy who friggin' invented the damn kernel, that's his issue. He's like, the thing that's holding back the Linux desktop is give me a unified standard and secure, I don't know if he said this, but I'm saying the secure way to install software packages.
Don't worry, this will be the year of the Linux desktop, Paul. It'll come.
It'll come.
Tyler,
almost
man,
there,
but
it's any day now.
But see, we're not there because of this issue, and it definitely relates to security. I think Josh and I were talking about this earlier. Is that like I can use Snap, I can use Flatpak, I can use apt, I can replace apt with other things. I can use an app image. I can compile from source. Right.
Stop! Because Doug, I mean, every single one of these methods, and they're all methods. Every single one of these methods. How do you know who flat-packed that app? How do you know what they did to it? How do you know it wasn't Tyler? Because we know we don't want to install that.
No, I completely agree.
If you unpack the Flatpak and you look at like the GitHub, which I was doing, there's like, hey, when you install this Flatpak, like run these commands.
No, I completely agree.
Now I got to go through every Flatpak that I'm installing and go.
But if you don't, you're screwed. I mean, you almost have to compile everything from sources, or you're going to get hosed eventually because somebody's going to have something that shouldn't be there.
But what if that GitHub repository is compromised?
Well, you have to write all the code
nobody's
from source.
ever put.
But what if my compiler? What if my compiler is compromised? What if the compiler to compile my compiler?
You should write your own compiler.
Backdoored? That's what I'm saying. How far do you go? That was actually a paper.
Write your own compiler.
Was it Koenig? No, it wasn't Kernigan. Who was it that?
Hey, Doug, could you pass Paul the tinfoil?
No. Seriously,
hold on. Malicious Life. Malicious Life did an interview, and I'm not speaking out of turn. And now I forget the original Unix person who did this paper. I want to say it was Kernigan, but it's not. Someone find that and send it to me. But the original paper was like in 98 or something, and it was the first thing to speak to supply chain, one of the first things, but also to speak to backdooring your system. And they theorized, like, what if login.c was compromised? What if the compiler to compile login.c was compromised? So every time you compiled login.c, it got a backdoor.
Back in there, yeah.
But what if, because there's a compiler that compiles the compiler that compiles login.c. What if that compiler, every time it compiled the compiler compiles login.c, gets the backdoor?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting supply chain thing. And that's exactly what we're talking about today, installing Linux software.
No,
it doesn't matter if I compile from source, app image, Snap, Flatpak, or apt.
Any of it.
There's a chain of trust and a supply chain in all of those different methods.
So to think about it, think about this, Paul. You're gonna make a Linux variant for a new chip that's out there. The first thing you got to do is come up with the cross compiler to compile everything, including the compiler that runs on that OS. So
Correct.
You're right. If you jack up the cross compiler to add other features, it'll probably be lost in the weeds. Nobody will know, and then all of a sudden,
you got all this code RISC V computers 100 years from now are running Doug's backdoor.
That's right.
Did you read that? I heard that NASA has adopted RISC V as a development platform, which is the open source RISC processor architecture. Yeah.
Hooey. Yeah.
I mean, you do functionality checks when you create a cross compiler. You're making sure that things operate the same, but I don't know if it'd be checking for added functionality. I mean, I'm not even sure if you'd find it.
But also, it's the signing process, and this extends beyond Linux and open source software. There's also a signing process for Microsoft software, drivers, applications, the secure boot chain of trust. All that comes back down to, like in Secure Boot, I submit my bootloader to Microsoft, and Microsoft says, hey, do you protect your keys? And I say yes, and they go, okay, we'll sign your bootloader. And then my bootloader, as Mickey and Jesse pointed out, DEF CON has all these heinous vulnerabilities that let me circumvent Secure Boot. It's the same problem. It's the same supply chain issue that we're talking about. And that, I mean, it has nothing to do with the framework platform.
No.
That's
not
software.
what keeps people from using it. It's what keeps people from using it is just the fact that's why I was kind of laughing when they were saying you have to compile everything, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But when you go out and you tell end users to do that, good luck. I mean, wait till the help desk phone.
Well, even if you try to explain to end users like how to install software on Linux today, like sure, you could use Snap, but Snap is the supply chain for Canonical, right? Canonical controls the supply chain.
Even
so then
that.
It comes down to, back to the Apple example, how much do I trust Canonical to do that?
I mean, and even that, I mean, all that stuff could be compromised.
But also there's the guy that used to work for Canonical and was the evangelist for Snap and left and then wrote a program called Unsnap to remove Snap from your system.
And Paul has promised to contact this gentleman to find out why he did that, because this is fascinating. So if that's you, please call into the show. We'd like to interview you. Seriously.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on GitHub. If you search for Unsnap Ubuntu or whatever, Unsnap Ubuntu. It's the first link in my search results rather, and it is a revolt. I mean, he's revolting. I removed Snap manually. I mean, I can't give you any specifics other than applications load slower when you use Snap, and that I don't like Snap, and I don't like the things being said about Snap, and I don't feel like I should be locked into using Snap when Linux is all about freedom, man. Like, why are you going to make me install Firefox via Snap? And again, you're pinned to that supply chain.
It's interesting. It's not just even, is it a malicious piece of code or package or application or whatever? It's also, what information is it collecting about me?
That's a great point.
I mean,
that's the other problem.
There's the surveillance capitalism aspect. There's the malicious code aspect. So these supply chain questions of where am I getting my software? I mean, come on, I feel like nostalgic for 10 years ago when we didn't even think about that, 15 years ago. Oh, wait, no, Tyler's on the line. 20 years ago when we didn't even think about these things. And when we just got software from wherever we needed to. Now, nostalgia ain't even what it used to be.
Of course, even if you compile from sources, unless you go through the entire sources, there's no telling what's in the sources. You may just go download a bunch of sources and compile them, and you've still built backdoors and other problems into your software. So,
I think we're talking about. I think
you also, when you downloaded the source, you basically had a checksum for the tarball, not the individual pieces. Typically, you knew you got the piece that was intended to be installed, whether it had any riders in it, any added features. You had no clue. And you weren't going to review it. I mean, you're just going to make sure it compiled and ran.
People just download and go, "Ooh, I installed from sources."
And make tests.
So here it is, right here. It's this guy. It's this guy, Josh. Alan Pope. Alan Pope was the developer advocate.
Yeah, it's in Discord.
Yep, developer advocate for Canonical for Ubuntu. Yeah, and is the primary author on GitHub of Unsnap.
So, like Josh said. Caller number 9, Colin, if you are caller 9, we'll give you a slightly used RT54G as you explain it to us.
So, in any case, I love my framework laptop so far. I spent all of today using exclusively my framework laptop. I love the modular ports, the screen, serviceability, take out some screws on the bottom. You can swap out the motherboard if you wanted to, access to all your components. You can swap the screen out. It's just, it's been awesome. It's been awesome. It's crazy. Josh, you like your framework too, right?
Oh, dude, I love that freaking thing. If it had if I could get an eGPU that would run OBS and DaVinci Resolve, I would be ecstatic.
Yeah, that's the one thing I miss is having an NVIDIA graphics card. Although I don't miss trying to get that working nicely in Linux.
Windows runs really well with NVIDIA drivers.
It does. It does. Windows.
So does, and my sound card works well.
Not so much. Not so much. There's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, have you ever looked into libmesa and the architecture behind it and how it's like transcoding OpenGL system calls and stuff like that? If you want to really gouge your eyes out, go read about the architecture behind libmesa, which is like it's kind of like a proxy between some of these windowing graphics applications, right? Because OpenGL was one of them wasn't as open, so they had to create Mesa as an open thing. I'm like, oh, that's why like you have a lot of issues.
We were writing malware to run in OpenGL and persist on the graphics card because it was very, very powerful that way and had direct memory access and system access. So it was great.
Yes. So good stuff. I highly recommend the framework. I mean, they don't sponsor the show. I'm not endorsed by them at all. Adrian actually told me about it. Then Josh said he got one. So I was like, well, I got to have one too. Yeah. And like I said, I do my MSI. I love my MSI. Tyler recommended that. And it has
MSI's are great machines.
Yeah, but it has the NVIDIA graphics card in it, man, which is just, it's pretty sweet. Although I was pretty impressed.
It has the battery life. It has the battery life of something you lit on fire. Let's be honest.
This is true. Battery life was not so great.
And you know, you could kill somebody with the charger block, but
I mean it's thin and it has a 3090 in it with 64 gigs and 2 SSDs, but I have to carry 2 laptops. So to be fair, like, is it any thinner than just carrying one? I don't know.
Right.
It keeps you in shape. So
that's right. Let's see. Letting off some steam. This is the browser and the browser attack.
Yay.
It was a great write-up about how this attack works. And it's pretty similar to other inside browser attacks and other phishing campaigns. The thing that I think is interesting too is that the browser and the browser window that comes up will have the verified SSL and the URL will be,
because it's just a render.
It's just a picture.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's in this case, but
it's a rendering.
It's an image. Yeah. The title bar is not a title bar that you could click into.
I can put
it's
Microsoft with a padlock on in the rendering because it's just a picture, so you can do whatever you want with it.
I always thought that was cool about the browser and browser attacks.
There's some interesting social engineering now that we're seeing from several attackers using kind of similar kind of ideas where they're doing an image that redirects to a site where they're obviously overlaying for MFA proxy transfer. However, we've seen a new one where they just overlay something, have the user put in the creds, that proxies the creds, and then they send a new email in with that same image for an MFA that then pops up on their phone. So it looks like it's a valid MFA token. They hit approve because they just got a sign-in from a phishing or social engineering attack. And so now you're seeing these images inside of images overlaid on browsers via email that pop up for credential hijacking that then lead to an MFA attack that is approved. So MFA is not protecting them in any way. It's not even proxying the MFA authentication token. It's actually just having them approve it as part of the, we'll call it authentication flow. So another interesting way in which browser and browser imaging is working.
Someone was telling me, I think it was Sinan, our guest for next week, that there's also social engineering where they'll log in as the user's credentials and then call the user on the phone and go, hey, can you give me that code that was just texted to you? Then, however you would want to construct, that wasn't as basic as that, right? But construct that social engineering attack. So they're definitely hyper.
That basic works just fine.
Yeah, okay. So the basic works just fine, right? But it just shows you that MFA is just another bump in the road.
You call with an American accent. You're George from the help desk. It's pretty straightforward.
Well, and that's why we're starting to hear phishing resistant MFA, so that calling the person to get the code that was just sent to them isn't going to work.
Yeah, there's pushes, SMS are going to be off limits soon. I think we're going to get to that point where we have to have token-based or device-based, but again, that doesn't really preclude you from social engineering. You must enter your code once you enter your credentials, getting that kind of mindset set so that there's no other way other than getting the code that's on your device at that point in time. That's still not going to protect you from that type of SE.
They just have to make it where the
phishing resistant, these devices are not acceptable. These are not considered phishing resistance either.
Right.
Nope.
Because you can read the code. You just have to make it.
And I can be social engineered to what the pin is as well.
Right.
Yeah, FIDO is actually pretty useful that way, right? Because there's not a good way you can't actually mail someone a device. That if that device is not present, that device does not log in. That's where session tokens and cookies and JWT protections, making sure that those are all done right, and then API and backend web connections. Those are the two things that kind of shortfall those, and there's workarounds. But that's getting to the point where we're almost we almost have to use FIDO for highly secure devices.
You just have to make sure that the users can't get to the information, because that's then it has to be automated. It has to be automated in such a way that when somebody calls you and says, "Give me this," they're going to walk you through 147 steps to try to get it, and then it won't be worth their time.
That was kind of what TPM was designed for as part of some of that, right? Where the TPM was storing some of the CAC credentials that was then authorizing that device in and of itself. And we kind of moved away from that. I think that was actually the wrong move. If that TPM had been leveraged for what FIDO or, the micro USB-C FIDO devices where you touch them and you're logging in, I think that would have actually been a better push market-wide and gotten us there quicker. But, that's where we're at.
Yeah.
Hindsight.
Well, we certainly don't want people snooping on our microphones.
Excuse me?
Is that even possible?
Yes. I mean, that's been... I don't know. Is that a Metasploit payload?
That's been a Metasploit payload since 2009.
It's one of the early
microphone and camera. I remember the camera one, but it's also microphone too, right?
Microphone was the early one. Yeah, that's been on there for a long time.
I mean, these are just, as long as you have a device driver or can access a device driver that can access the hardware, you can receive the data. You can receive the data coming from that device, whether it's USB, whether it's a keyboard, whether it's a microphone, whether it's a camera.
It's
right?
just data.
It's the device driver that controls.
And your office and your house is full of microphones now, or potential microphones.
Right.
So this research.
I do like the hardware switches that many of the laptops have put on for some of these things, where it actually shuts down the chipset or the power to that chipset.
You mean like the framework laptop?
Does it do that?
Yes.
Yeah, so my MSI
it is a hardware switch for microphone and camera.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That is a nice feature, honestly.
There was some Purism phones. Yeah, Purism hardware has a kill switch for mic and camera on its LibRem 5 USA phone as well.
Interesting.
That's the way to do it. If the device is off, there is no way for software to interact with that device because it's not getting power. Yeah, it has to have power.
Yep. Unless it's location Wi-Fi or LTE radios.
Well, that's an interesting. But interesting on Apple's devices. Apple's devices keeps that chip powered on even if your phone is off, right?
Yep.
The Find My chip is an always on chip.
Yeah.
But that's very similar also to Intel ME. Even if your computer is off, but it's receiving power,
or the
that
BMC,
chip, BMCs are the same way. Like that processor, that RAM, and its access to all of the hardware, which is interesting. It must be able to talk to the CPU to power on certain things that are off. Like it must have to power on the CPU and the hard drive. It's going to do something, right? And can it do that? It must be able to talk.
Has anybody used one of these Purism phones?
I've looked at them.
Who does the security testing and it's an interesting, I've looked at several of the non-smartphones for this so that they do some, more simple OS things and you don't have all the apps, but this one's outside of Android, outside of iOS. That is not easy to do.
So there's actually a pretty small market here for really deep Linux and privacy nerds. Purism and Pine. Right, Pine has a.
I have a Pine phone. It is
Pine phone. They have usable. A phone. They've got a laptop. Yeah, I think that's the kind of the general consensus. I've heard it as even on a popular podcast like Rogan talking about this stuff. Talking about privacy. Rogan's actually tried some of the these privacy Linux-based phones, and kind of has the same thing. It's like, I don't want to poo-poo this stuff, but it's like it's not for everyone, man. It's super hard.
Dude, it's not usable.
It's not usable.
Dear, don't even get me started.
I agree.
I mean, years ago, I worked with what was called a SME pad. I don't remember what that stood for, but it was a secure smartphone. It actually was dual. There were two devices in it. It had certifications up and down the wazoo, including NSA, in order to be used, and it was split for classified and unclassified, but it was so locked down as to be almost unusable.
Was that was it a sat phone?
And that's where we got into the Suite B Androids.
Was it satellite or was it cellular?
Oh, what was the secure cell phone company?
Black Phone?
What was it? Black
Phone.
Was it Black Phone? Who? What did they
Part
call
of
it?
Silent Circle?
Silent Circle. It was Silent Circle. Yeah.
Yeah, Silent Circle started Black Phone.
Yes.
Dragorn was there. And he was the one that built them.
Yes. Very similar to what you're talking about, Lee. I don't know how we got on the subject, but we're making sure we got our history.
Microphones.
Microphones.
Yeah, we were talking about microphones, and really a physical switch that can't be software written or cutting the wires, which is becoming harder to do, is really about the only path you have for making sure your microphone and or camera is truly disabled. And for most people, it's not necessarily a risk they are worried about.
Yeah, agreed. But this research that just came out was detecting if your microphone is being accessed. And so this relies on the fact that digital MEMS microphones on commodity laptops emanate electromagnetic signals when active. The emanation stems from the cables and connectors that carry clock signals to the mic hardware, ultimately to operate its analog to digital conversion. Their software captures this leakage to identify the on-off status of the laptop mic. And they called it TikTok. T-I-C-K.
Big book of poor naming choices.
Yes, it's very poor naming. I think they say that in the article. It's a very poor naming choice. But it, as a prototype, consists of a near-field probe, a radio frequency amplifier, software-defined radio, and a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B.
Interesting.
If you can find a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B. Pretty cool.
Very cool.
A lot of people are very interested in this idea. I
think as we established, though, the hardware kill switch is the way to go.
It is.
If you're really concerned about that.
That's just so challenging.
The kill switch actually kills the hardware, and it doesn't just
right.
It's actually stopping physical hardware and not just a software switch.
So this is like double tinfoil hat. Like I've turned my microphone off, and I've got my software-defined radio with a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B that's monitoring
to make sure it's off.
The electromagnetic transmissions from my microphone are actually turned off. This is double tinfoil hat level.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's not just a regular Reynolds aluminum foil.
Oh, it's that double side, the double,
thick, like grill,
thick one,
the grilling
It's
one.
the commercial
grade grilling.
Yeah.
Double layer grilling thickness tinfoil hat.
Yeah.
Hang on 1 second. Adrian, you spelled eclipsium wrong.
Oh, that's
it for you then.
Oh man, did we have to vote him off the island?
He's not even on the air, and he's getting called out.
Oh my god!
I had to do it.
It's a tough group. I thought we liked Adrian.
Man, the VMware one.
And Sam actually called him out on. Sorry, Sam. I did it first.
I'm missing all the Discord fun, obviously. We really need to talk about the VMware performance, though. We cannot skip that.
Oh, yeah.
I did skip over some stories, too.
No, you hadn't got to that. What was the next one?
We do have to talk about the rep bleed.
Yeah, that's the one he's talking about.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So
this is a big problem. So what we're saying in this article is VMware is not going to fix this right now.
Yeah. Their only fix for it was to turn off the rep bleed protection, so you have to set it to off.
But they had
70% performance dip.
Yeah, just 70%. Come on,
5.919 of the.
But VMware is this a microcode? Is this a microcode update that has to fix this?
So it's the hypervisor interaction of the microcode in order for hypervisor execution code to properly work on the processor, right? Or inside the kernel in order for that to pass through.
Because hypervisors are like ring -1.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Because ring
-1 with software interaction at ring 0, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, the root interaction with the guests.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, 70. This is
bad.
That's bad. 70% is that's
7% would be bad, but
70% is what you reserve for Chrome.
When I first read that, I said 7%, and I was like, "Wait, 7% sucks." And I looked at it again.
You can't run Chrome now. That's basically
you're not even going to be able to run Chrome. On
think about the cloud providers that were running some hypervisors or an enterprise, and you all of a sudden are troubleshooting a mass dip of 70%. That's
what a 30% decline in network performance. On the same thing. So your network dive bombs, your processing dive bombs, And it was even a storage degradation of, it was like 20% or something on the storage degradation. So it was like basically you just bricked your whole VMware
You might as well
system.
just be crypto mining at that point.
Yeah, you may as well get some benefit out of
right?
it.
Well,
Exactly.
now they did say in this story, I read this story several times because I do have some VMware stuff. Their workaround is to set this option off. So there's a parameter.
So be vulnerable.
Yeah, there's a parameter that so you be vulnerable because their argument was that this rat bleed vulnerability is not that easy to get to. It's not. But I mean, basically they're telling you don't worry about it.
We were talking about this at work today, and we were putting attacks like these in the context of impact and likelihood, right? Yeah. And that's interesting when we talk about these speculative execution vulnerabilities, or really, I'll term these as speculative execution vulnerabilities, right, as a class. Like, what would you attach the impact and likelihood? The impact is you can read arbitrary
You can
kernel
extract.
memory,
Well, you can extract
kernel
passwords, key
Yeah.
tokens. You can extract all kinds of stuff from that protected space.
Likelihood is interesting because, like, what's the likelihood that someone's going to target you with this attack? But then, like, the other part of the likelihood matrix, if you will, is what's the likelihood that they're going to successfully execute the attack and extract those keys, right? Because I would imagine there's a
probability where you multiply the two probabilities to get the new probability. So I mean,
like,
it
depends
does
on what the hypervisor is running, right? If it's GovCloud, that might be a target worthwhile.
absolutely. I mean, so you do have to, and that's the other component of this is how big of a target are you? So if you're some isolated place,
what's the likelihood this attack is going to fail though? Like how often does it have to fail?
Pretty high, I would think. Yeah.
And go,
look at Stuxnet, like what it took to do that. Like it would take a very sophisticated actor, and there's a lot more caveats and hardware things to get over on this. Like this would be a difficult thing. I think this is more academia, in my opinion.
I agree.
But also,
I mean,
it's older processors. This was VMware's test was run on Intel Skylake,
Coffee Lake.
So released between 2015 and 2017.
And a bunch of AMD. There's a bunch of AMD series that were same time frame. So I mean, it's certainly not everybody. It's something that I would be a bit frustrated if I was a big target. I was a government entity and I had this issue, and I've got this hardware.
After 5 to 7 years, you're not refreshing your hardware. I mean, that's conceivable.
It's very conceivable. And there's people running old versions of everything, and you may not have the budget to say let's just replace all of our servers and with new stuff. And so it's kind of frustrating to me that that's their fix, is just tough, hope it doesn't happen, it'll be okay, don't worry. The Chinese and North Koreans never target anybody with this.
Well, I mean, just buy new servers and upgrade your VMware.
Of course you do. Yeah, that's what I'll get right on that.
Get right on that.
Yeah, I'll turn the bill into you, right?
I don't know. I will say that I found some pretty heinous UEFI type vulnerabilities on those older systems too. Some of the security has improved.
But
since then.
People have these long-term horizons on some of this equipment, and they don't get new budget every year or every 5 years even to replace this stuff, and they do have old equipment running. So, in fact, maybe some people are going, "Wow, I'm glad we hadn't upgraded yet because we were getting ready to buy into the 2016."
I was kind of enamored with the time frame because in my research so far, 2015 to 2017 was a prolific time period for BIOS and UEFI vulnerabilities. It was, I mean, there was a ton of research, and it took time, I think, for the industry to go, wow, that crap is really bad.
Yep.
Intel, what are we going to do to fix it? Okay, here are the fixes. Then it has to permeate itself through the supply chain so that when you're building new systems, that your hardware supports these new more secure configurations, and your configuration itself is flipping all the right bits and configuring all your firmware so that by the time my 12th gen framework laptop gets delivered, when I check it, I go, oh, they actually flipped all of the correct bits. But like it took that 5 to 7 year period. And I also think it's interesting that this research actually affected that change, which is encouraging. But we all know not everyone's going out and buying a brand new 12th gen CPU to replace their laptops, desktops, and servers. Like,
it's not always as simple as that either.
Time,
and you know,
right?
you say, well, we've got 150 servers sitting in racks, and we can't just, you know, they're all exactly the same, and every single one of them is a Coffee Lake, you know, Intel CPU that's vulnerable to this. So, you know, just scrap the whole place and start over.
And each one's running 100 VMs.
Yeah.
So we can just swap those out, right?
Sure. Like, we'll just start replacing them tomorrow.
Not going to happen.
Makes sales reps happy.
It is some of that older hardware, though, that I do still find
it's terrifying.
Really, really terrible.
Well, I mean, nobody was engineering stuff, you know, with any thoughts towards security for years and years and years at that level. I mean, that was just
the threat didn't really exist. I mean, I know it was technically possible, but it wasn't an active threat, and it is now. Things have evolved, which is cool and scary at the same time.
And this was stuff that was very easy to put into the category of esoterica for so long, and just, you know, just that same idea that not very many people could do this, not very many people could understand this, not very many people could target this. But then all of a sudden, you know, everybody's got a nice little how-to paper.
Yeah, but I don't think it's all of a sudden. I still think it's been a slow progression, because even if we talk about BIOS write protections, right, which is actually my part 3 that hopefully we'll publish this week, is talking about it was TrickBot and what we dubbed Trick Boot that took advantage of poor BIOS write protections, which again, in my limited scope, I found on older systems. Newer systems tended to be a little better.
Well, it's exactly the academic research process. There's basic research where somebody theorizes something, then people start fiddling around with it. Somebody finds some weird academic esoteric approach, and then all of a sudden it starts trickling down into
like Yuri's presentation, and Recon from 2017.
And then it starts trickling down out into the general use, and then practitioners like you start actually poking at it and saying, here's how and then the hackers are poking at it saying, here's how we could use it.
Right.
You're finding ways to solve it, and then it slowly, it slowly gets corrected, and so it's just a long process.
Absolutely.
And how viable is it to say configure the OS to not boot on that hardware if it doesn't have the left protections on it? I mean, like, for example, Windows 11 won't run on a system without a TPM. I'm saying, could you market an OS that wouldn't boot if the firmware wasn't secure enough?
Well, they have. I mean, they're they do that all the time with you can't boot this, you can't boot that. I mean, it won't run on this hardware, so. I mean, I've had that happen before.
Is it to today's standards, or is it to the prior
Surface
model?
The Surface is that way because the Surface leverages the UEFI Secure Boot trust chain through Microsoft that is separate from UEFI Secure Boot. Whatever the certificate chain is.
So it's Microsoft's internal CA from Microsoft operating systems and hardware versus their third-party CA program, which is for everyone else, which they run just because that's, I don't know if it was UEFI who appointed them, but somehow Microsoft got appointed.
They volunteered, they got appointed, all the same.
Whatever, yeah. Surface is also interesting in like the Apple respect, when we talk about supply chain and firmware, in that Microsoft controls the hardware, they control the firmware, they control the bootloader, the kernel, and the operating system, which sets them up to get everything right. And when I update my Surface Pro 3, which is what I happen to have, and I scan it, I'm like, imagine that. It scans clean because through Windows Update, Microsoft can update everything because they don't have to worry about supporting all of that firmware and software running on different configurations of hardware. They know my Surface Pro 3 has this hardware and will run this software and all of the configuration bits, and they're off to the races, which I like. However, not every enterprise in the world is going, we all use Surface, Microsoft Surface hardware and Microsoft software. I don't think there is a large enterprise in the Fortune 1000 and even a lot of military and government that can go, yes, we all have this. It doesn't happen.
It's only Trimark that does that.
Well, and how many employees are you? 12?
Not that many.
Yeah, right. So you can do that.
He said large.
But they do it.
I mean, Apple's doing that. For how they're managing Secure Boot, right? Like, what did Mickey and Jesse say that Apple's doing? Because Secure Boot in and of itself is an application and a program in which that third-party chain is built in unless you're modifying that. So is the M1 leveraging a different CA and they're using a different code base for Secure Boot, or are they not using Secure Boot at all?
I believe, I don't know 100%.
I thought Apple was using Secure Boot.
I don't know 100%. I think that, so I'm going to speculate, and the answer is going to be it depends whether you're an Intel-based Mac or you're an M1-based Mac. I would venture to guess, and I don't know this for sure, but if you're an M1-based Mac and you have you have complete control over the chip, which means you have I don't think they third-party outsource their BIOS, right? They have complete control over their UEFI firmware running on their Macs, which means you have complete control over Secure Boot, which means you can implement your own CA, you can implement all of your certificates, you can sign all of your own UEFI components, all of your bootloaders, all of your kernels, and control that entire chain. And so Apple can basically control the entire supply chain for Secure Boot. I don't know if that's exactly how they do it, but the way I understand Secure Boot and the supply chain up to this point is that's possible for Apple. Because on Linux, for example, I can roll my own keys, right? I can generate my own platform key. I can generate my own key exchange key, and I can then sign my own bootloader and kernel and validate that. And then when it changes, I have to re-sign all of that. But I can, if I want to go through that work, I can sign everything myself through machine owner key, or mock-util is what it's called on Linux. Yeah.
By the way, check the Discord. There's some interesting things. People are reading that post about the 70% performance hit, and they're actually pulling some interesting information out of it. Dionysus is really going crazy on it. Dimitri and Dionysus are having some fun with that.
That's interesting.
But in the meantime, while Paul's reading that, Doug, hit some of your stories. I like some of your stories, man.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Story number three. This is fun.
Oh, yeah. So story number 3 is basically that you can, purchase. I always like to report on these stories because I think a lot of people need to be aware of things that they're using and equipment that they're using that can be problematic. And this was showing that there was 80,000 of these Hikvision or Hikvision. I don't know how you say it. It's Hike.
So it's funny. My son plays soccer, and we spend a lot of time, the parents of the soccer team, and so it gets to know people, and I'm asking what you do. One of them is actually a hardware electrical engineer for a chip type company. He and I have interesting conversations. One of the other parents is a reseller for surveillance equipment. And he told me that it's Hikvision. Because I said Hikvision has terrible
that sounds awful,
security.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. I'm like, is it? And
I thought it might be Hike.
In conversation, he said Hikvision.
Well,
and I'm like, wait, dude, is it Hikvision? He's like, yeah, it's Hike.
Well, I was originally
he's like, I didn't want to correct you. I'm like, no, I want to know how it's pronounced.
I was originally saying Hike.
Yeah.
But yeah, Hikvision I think is right. But there's so they just showed that there's 80,000 Hikvision cameras out in the world right now that are vulnerable to an old injection flaw.
Command injection. Please tell me it's command injection.
It's a command injection flaw.
Love command injection.
And it's all over the world and so forth. And this is just such a good it's such a good example, A, as a warning, and B, as it just shows you how this IoT stuff, IIoT stuff can just be absolutely devastating. Because one, you may have hundreds of these things. And they're also difficult to fix because they're IoT devices and they're not designed to be fixed, and they're supposed to be put up.
Wait, you're saying that firmware and supply chain problems could make things vulnerable? Oh my God, who would have thought that?
No, and they're Chinese, so of course they're trustworthy, but But Hikvision is state-owned Chinese.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I mean, everything in China is effectively state-owned anyway, even if it's not. But I mean, this thing, I see when I see these stories, they just really worry me because a lot of people buy this stuff. They buy it from a vendor. It's installed by a vendor.
Correct.
They put it in place. It's designed to be there for years and years and years and years. And of course, one of the biggest selling points of any kind of equipment like this is that it's low maintenance, low upkeep. You want to be able to put people on it that monitor it, and they don't know anything about it, and you don't want to hire a staff of people that have to ride herd on it all the time. And
but
yet, here it is.
It's interesting, the supply chain going back to my new friend Tom on the soccer team, right? He is the reseller. Now, he doesn't do the installs. So, you've got a little more complex. So you've got, let's go up the supply chain, right? You've got maybe the software creators of some of the drivers and such, and you've got some of the hardware and firmware manufacturers. Hikvision is consuming that top end of the supply chain, or bottom end, however you want to phrase it, right? Making a product, manufacturing it in China. So there's multiple supply chains going on already. Importing into the U.S. to my friend Tom's company that's procuring it, and Tom is selling it to an installer who's then installing it in the end user customer site. So like when there's a security flaw that needs to be patched, how does that
It's like all these other security systems
work?
I mean, if you go to anybody, I mean, there's a quadrillion of these places. They've got, second, third, fourth, fifth parties that are doing installs, upkeep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The parts aren't even consistent. They may be rebranded. So they buy a bunch of stuff, they rebrand them to say X Communications or whatever on them. And well, I mean, if you're smart and let's say you're making the camera device, right? And then if you're the manufacturer, like, because the camera is a small computer, so the like actual camera's a weird term when we're saying this, like, because the camera is really a computer. The camera's one component. Yeah, the vision is just the camera part is irrelevant. Yeah,
but I need to also have a device driver for that camera.
Yep.
And so if I've gone through the trouble of going, I'm going to manufacture this camera and I'm going to produce the device driver for it, I'm going to resell that to as many people as I can, as many different organizations as I can. So I'm like, oh, you want to make a surveillance device? I got a camera and a device driver, and you plop it in, and maybe it's a binary blob device driver in Linux. Like, therefore, that forces you to be on this Linux kernel, and that's your deciding factor as the second organization in the supply chain that's going on making this surveillance device. So therefore, I got a great deal on this camera that comes with this device driver. That means I'm going to be Linux kernel 4 point something, and all the rest of my devices are going to be Linux kernel 4 point something. I'm going to go sell that to the supplier in the U.S.
And it was made by a hostile foreign power that has a 10,000 year history of playing the long game.
Yes.
I mean, and these things are.
There happens to be a hook in that device driver that anyone can access.
I mean, I literally that paper you were talking about earlier that came out in the 90s. It was talking about supply chain.
Who was that?
I can't remember the name of it, but that was a paper that made me start talking about this back in the 90s. I remember talking to a bunch of military people saying, "You realize that everything you own came from China, and if I was China, I would be thinking about that too, and that." Who knows what may happen in 20 years, but I know these boards will still be in those tanks.
Right.
And I mean, that's a little tinfoil hatty, I grant you, and I'm not a huge tinfoil hat person, but I was definitely pulling out some Reynolds wrap right there. Is that what that stuff's called? Yeah, Reynolds wrap.
Yes.
Aluminium foil.
Aluminium foil?
Aluminium foil. That's how they say it.
Let me go get my roll from Kaiser Aluminum.
Yeah.
The heavy stuff.
But I mean, these cameras are terrifying. I mean, and they're everywhere, and they're in industrial, they're in nuclear plants, they're in all kinds of places. And so the FCC said you shouldn't use them back in 2019, but they're still there. I used to
be in video surveillance and did it professionally for a while. The amount of different cameras that are just rebranded by various sellers. Axis is actually one of the few manufacturers that builds all their own. They do a really good job. And they still have problems, and they still have things that they haven't fixed after 10 or 20 years. You got to remember that video surveillance falls under the aegis of facilities, physical security, which has the mindset that I put a door with a lock in, 20 years later, I'm going to replace it because it looks like crap. Until then, I don't care about it anymore. We don't pen test our doors, which is why we've had to all learn lock picking, because they need to be pen tested.
Yeah. And these cameras need to be too, because if you go look around, every commercial entity from college campuses to nuclear plants have cameras all over the place. And
it gets better. It gets better, Doug. Up until about 2000 and I'll say 7, but I don't know, 2007, 2008, you could unplug an IP camera, which is, I know, crazy, a standard RJ45, plug a switch in, plug the camera back in, plug it into and get going. And by the way, now there's extra ports. I don't know, what could you plug into that? Maybe a laptop?
Yeah.
The amount of
streams encrypted.
What's that?
RTSP streams are not encrypted.
No, they're not.
It doesn't even matter about the camera. Most of these frigging systems were supposed to be air-gapped from the corporate network. Guess how many were?
None. Well, one. There was one.
I found the paper, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Anyone want to guess? It's called Reflections on Trusting Trust. Who the author
1984 by Ken Thompson.
Thank you. 1984.
Yeah,
Ken
that's the
Thompson
paper.
presented the Journal of
I found it
Communications.
just before we started talking. Yes.
Volume 27, number 8,
That's-
August 1984.
that's the paper.
Reflections on Trusting Trust. Ken Thompson, the co-authur of Unix.
I read that paper in the late 90s, and it
Yeah.
really made me take a deep breath and go, wow, I never thought about this.
And so it was, give credit where credit is due, Andrew Ginter, 40-year-old backdoor on Malicious Life. It was a Malicious Life special edition that I listened to that talked about that paper. And I want to say, like, most of us work in security, like, oh yeah, I remember that paper, either reading it or referencing it in some way, shape, form, or fashion, but really dug into, like, backdooring the compiler that compiles the compiler kind of thing.
And it just made me, and I immediately went straight to like firmware and things, because I was immediately thinking, what's on every system, everywhere, forever? And it was firmware. And that was where I started talking about chips and things like that. And I was talking to the military about chips, and I was saying, look, all your chips and all your boards came from a hostile foreign power that you consider an enemy. And that's where
not like this has been seen or used in a recent war, Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, if I was a nation state and I had a 10,000-year history of playing the long game, I would, and I controlled all the industries in my country to the point where I could literally call down there and say, hey, this is what you're going to do, I would be doing that. I mean, I know it's a little tinfoil hatty, but it's the idea of it was what made me start thinking about. I was pushing it.
It's not tinfoil hatty.
No, I know it's not really, but it was like, it's a little bit off in that direction. But I mean,
not even close.
Tinfoil hat equals good strategy. That's just people that can't think long term enough, that don't have big enough.
Yeah, but most of the time, firmware is so bad that you don't need. You don't need to build in a backdoor.
It's already got a default password.
It's already there. Like, we were talking about my MSI laptop and things like that as an example. Like, there are certain things where if you have configured the hardware and the firmware in a certain way such that it's vulnerable, and you haven't, let's say, set certain registers or bits in the BIOS, right? And I said, well, that's a security vulnerability.
Yep.
And, well, I want to just go fix that because I've read the data sheet on the chipset, and I'm like, well, you should be flipping these bits. Like, why can't I just go flip those bits and remediate the problem as a configuration problem? One of the reasons you can't do that is because there might not be code running on the system that either allows that to happen or actually makes that change in the bit that makes that contact between the CPU and the chipset actually work. And that's what really keeps me up at night in terms of firmware security, is that some of these are not very easily remediated.
No. Most of them are not very easily remediated.
Yeah, like if your firmware actually loads code inside of protected RAM that you access in order to change some of these essentially configuration settings. They're setting registers, right, that flip these bits. If that, you could do that, but if the code doesn't exist to actually go change the register, nothing may happen.
Right.
Or you may do it and you may break your system. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. Like, if you want to go change some of these settings on your own, like, more power to you. But, like, don't call me if you break your system, because there is a high probability that you may cause a brick on your system.
And we've all been there.
Yes.
I've done a few. And it was like, okay, new motherboard, please.
Yeah. Or just hope you made a backup of your spy flash and you've got a spy program.
Or that you can roll. Yeah, I mean, it always have a rollback plan if you ever. I mean, I always tell people, even if you're just going to change some setting in the BIOS, you should make a rollback plan, because you may barbecue it. and write down all your settings.
A lot of these settings, it's interesting. There is no facility to change them in the BIOS.
No, there's
a lot of the settings you change in your BIOS are following the same process I described, but they're usable.
What you're talking about is lower level than that. But I'm just saying, even if you're just making changes to your basic BIOS settings,
that too. That could
make a backup of your settings before you do it, because the best outcome is it bricks, and you have to like force reset the BIOS. And then you lose all your settings, and you don't remember what you had that set to, and now your RAID doesn't work, and all these other things that you may be using.
Usually, most motherboards have a force reset on the BIOS.
No, they do.
Reset
the little jumper you can twist and you can force it, but you lose all the settings you had. Correct. So if you don't know what they were,
you're screwed.
You may be sitting there going, "How do I get my RAID back?" Because I don't know what it was set to. And what you're talking about is 10 times more frightening than what I'm talking about. I mean, I'm just talking about your BIOS. You're talking about below that level. I mean, you're talking about...
It is BIOS, but it's the level below that's user controllable. These settings
you're talking about bricks wrapped in aluminum foil.
Aluminum.
Okay. Awesome. What else have I got?
What else you got? Oh, you had
the sock puppets.
We have to talk about sock puppets.
I love the sock puppets. This story was about...
Jack Daniel used to have sock puppets. Remember that? Does anyone remember that?
They were adorable.
They were.
Well, this one is just... It's just really, again, a warning. So a lot of my news stories are always like warnings to people to be aware of. This isn't just another case of the evolution of phishing. So, and I've seen similar attacks to this. And so, like every week now at the university, we get something from the president or the provost or something that says, "Oh no, all parking certificates have been voided. You need to click here to get a new one." And, that's bad. But now what they're doing is they're sort of leveraging this by creating, I don't know if it was bots, but they're creating ways so that you're getting multiple, pieces of information from different people in the company. So now maybe you get an email from the president that says your pay is going to be cut, and you don't want to click that. And then immediately you get another email that says, this is from a different member of the organization saying, "Oh, don't click on that link in the president's email. That was fake. Click here to validate," and it's just another way to manipulate you using psychology, because, you're told, "Oh, be careful what links you click. Be careful what links you click." And it's the old trick of warning people about something again. And this is an old trick. I mean, we've all done this. You're warning them about something. You're saying, "Yeah, I'm just calling to let you know there's a problem." And then, but this is, they're now using multiple layers of this stuff, and I'm pretty sure it's bot driven. So they scrape the site, they get a whole bunch of names, they can send you a flurry of emails or a conversation or any kind of thing from different people in your organization that looks like they're having a conversation, or that they're exchanging information, or this one's warning you about that one. There's all kinds of different angles on this, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I don't think there were any actual sock puppets involved, which is too bad.
I know, I'm disappointed.
It was kind of sad. I was when I saw the headline, I was kind of hoping for some Muppets or something, but unfortunately,
it's a good headline.
It was a great headline, and it's a good description. I mean, it is. Here, it's a Punch and Judy show.
Sock puppets are not easy to do at scale. People don't realize what it takes to orchestrate the different communications, to do them well. Like you talk about disinformation and the interaction between your puppets and upticking and upvoting different things in order to get certain messages and propaganda out. It takes a little bit of effort. Many of the really good groups that you get in with sock puppets, those are curated over more than 5 years. How about that? And you burn one of those because you do something wrong, or you cross streams, or you use IP. All of those things become a big issue. So doing sock puppets at scale is hard. Doing sock puppets for intel gathering and doing it well takes time and curation, and continuing sock puppet cultivating and utilizing it's so much time. So people think sock puppets are easy. Everyone has sock puppets. Okay, great. I'm glad you set up a Twitter account and you use some burner number. That's nice. But to do this usefully, it's not easy to do. So I give a lot of credit to places that have found good ways to do that, and to do that at scale long term, because many of us have not done it at scale for the level that many of the places require just to activate and operate. So,
but I mean, I will say, if you do this subtly and you don't use it for, say, straight phishing, you use it to implant things and to become established. I mean, it's a terrifying kind of development.
To establish bona fides on the social engineering side is very interesting. Getting in between email chain threads and making introduction from company to company, or false company pretext to pretext works really, really well. And that is something that LinkedIn has been trying to get a handle on for a very, very long time, and doing validation between companies. Like if you're a large company, validating the employees that say they work for you is not easy to do. So it's pretty easy to leverage those accounts and have a valid account underneath of one of those companies, especially with compromised credentials. And many companies don't actually look for those kind of things. So those email and chain thread social engineering attacks become very difficult to find from platforms like LinkedIn.
I still think that should be called a how to succeed in business without really trying attack. It's kind of wordy, but if you're not familiar with that, it was an old Broadway play, and it's like a guy who just basically walks into a company one day and sits down at a desk. He's never been hired or anything else. He just pretends that he works there, and he manages to worm his way into this environment. So that's kind of what I call those attacks.
That's happened in actual pen tests.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, it's absolutely doable. And I mean, it's a classic social engineering kind of model, but it's definitely a cool thing.
I think Josh is dropping.
Oh, it's Josh leaving. Well, yeah, it's getting to that time. It just went quick.
We have a hunt for a rare version of IBM's OS2.
Oh, we forgot that one. Yeah. Was it in Slovenian was what it was? I read that story.
It was OS2 Warp 4.
It was Warp 4 in Slovenian language edition.
Big difference between OS2 Warp and OS2 Warp version 4.
Yeah.
3 and 4 were
By then it was kind of working.
4 was actually
really
good. I mean, at the time, Warp version 4 was a serious desktop OS contender.
It was.
Like it was. 3 was not a great desktop OS.
I tried to install the first one, so the very literally not Warp, even the very first OS.
1, 2, and 3 were.
Yeah, they were just. It wasn't there, and then I had the second version, and Lou and I actually got the second version kind of running on a server I built.
Yeah,
because it had to have ECC RAM and all this stuff, and so we tried to put it on a big PC that we built, and it wouldn't run because it didn't have ECC RAM. So I actually went and kind of borrowed a server from the university, and we pulled it down.
Air quotes borrowed, huh?
Yeah, I think I still have it.
You wouldn't miss it, yeah.
Yeah, it was an old one. It was just sitting somewhere, but it had ECC RAM. And so we actually did get it running. That was like the second version of OS2. It wasn't even the Warp version yet, but then...
Right, yeah, because Warp was
later.
Version 4, I remember in my office being one of the first people to upgrade to version 4, and like the desktop environment changed dramatically, and it was like, wow, this could be a contender.
I really thought this thing could conceivably. I mean, it was backed by...
I think they say that in the article.
It was backed by IBM. I thought, okay, you got Big Blue behind it, so there's money. It actually seems viable all of a sudden, and I said maybe this is going to be another big thing.
They say that.
In fact, we bought shares of stock in IBM then.
Yeah, like among the players in the desktop market back in the 90s, IBM's OS2 was one of them, a desktop PC operating system that could very much give Windows a run for its money.
Yeah,
I felt that.
And I actually thought that. We were always we hated Windows so bad back then, and I mean we still don't love it, but we hated it back then. And we were, Unix, Linux stuff was so, and then OS2 Warp version 4 was like, this could actually do something for us, but it just never caught on.
I mean, IRIX at the time was probably pretty decent in terms of a
HPUX and Solaris.
Well, in terms of a graphical OS.
Well,
right?
yeah.
Solaris a little later.
If you have
Solaris.
A copy of this,
but this was Slovenian. So
this is
But I thought it was interesting, like the, so in the 90s of a blah blah blah. But basically, what they said in the article was that IBM, in order to gain market share, was regionalizing OS2 Warp version 4 in all these weird air quotes weird countries that Microsoft was not regionalizing
more
Windows.
esoteric.
Esoteric. So they did a Slovenian version, a regionalization of OS2 Warp version 4 for Slovenia. And the Slovenian Computer Museum is trying to get their hands on a copy, and it sounds like they got a copy, but it didn't have the original like packaging and stuff. So they're looking for the original packaged version.
If you have it, you should contact this because I love these museums.
If you've got a Slovenian packaged OS2 Warp like in the cellophane, you could sell it to Slovenia for like $4.
Yeah, but
they're probably going to give you about $4.
But at least it would be in a museum.
It would be. I mean, you should totally. We need this.
I actually found out one of my paintings that I got from my friend Lou was exhibited in the Venezia Biennale in 1938.
Wow.
And was like at the request of Benito Mussolini.
Nice.
Which was kind of cool. I was like, wow.
So that goes for $8, is that?
No, not $8. I was having it restored, and I found there was a little sticker on the back that said Venezia Biennale 1938. Wow. I was like, wow.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. I like to.
So yeah, if you've got the Slovenian version of OS2 Warp version 4,
we can help you with that transaction. Just let us know.
Right.
We'll see. I'll call somebody and we'll send Marcin or somebody over there to check.
That's right.
To talk to them.
10% of $4 is 40 cents.
I'm not in it for the money. I just like these little obscure, tech museums are always cool, and and having a copy of the Slovenian issue of Warp. OS2 Warp.
Like there
4.
was a time where I didn't think it was strange that we had a token ring network and the desktop clients were OS2 Warp.
Yeah, that's very common.
that was just what people
very
ran.
Common.
They were just standard. Don't unplug that cable because you'll break the ring. Right?
Yeah.
Or even kick it hard.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, token ring was pretty tough. You could bash token ring.
Yeah, it was pretty.
Yeah, you could hang your laundry from token ring connection.
Just make sure you clear the port before you plug something in.
Yeah, old ThinNet. We had a ThinNet network that was running OS2.
10 base 2 you could break for so easily.
Yeah, and ours broke all the time, and every single machine went down. But my Twinx machines I had, you could probably hang your laundry on the Twinx connectors, and the milking machine is what we used to call it.
The token ring was pretty
a little more fault tolerant.
Yeah. I mean, just don't break the ring. That was the thing.
Don't break the ring.
Don't break the ring.
No,
I did that.
Can't do that.
Quite a few times.
Everybody's done that. We've all done it.
Is it really? I didn't. Now you're making me feel better.
You're not unique in that. Everybody had a ring network has broken their ring network. Either they
because each of the switches had like an in and an out, and they were configured.
Yeah, they're not really switches. Yeah, they're
not switches. You're right.
They were more like hubs.
They're hub relays, yeah.
Hub relays, that's a great way to describe it. But like the top left was like an out that went to the in the top right or something like that. And then the other one, they were like daisy chain connected, but they all... And like your bottom one had to be connected to the top one or something like that, right?
There were certain key ports on there had to be plugged together.
The ports all the way to the left and right had to be plugged in like a ring, basically, to complete a circuit. You had to complete a circuit. And if you accidentally unplugged one of those and plugged in the wrong one,
everything stopped.
Like if the thing that would do it is if you needed to add another hub to get more ports, then you had to like reconfigure the main cables
it was
that
a
made the
cabling
ring.
nightmare,
And like if you had a mental moment or whatever, or the cables were a mess, which they always were, and you did the wrong one, everyone go, why is the network down? Because Paul broke the ring. Or we added a new employee, and I had to add another.
Or the cleaning staff thought it was an outlet and unplugged it to plug in a vacuum cleaner.
I wouldn't blame them for that. Actually, it kind of did.
Especially if you don't put your cables under the floor, they were just like duct taped down. It was like literally. I had a lab like that, and they were just literally. In fact, they were laying on the floor when I took over the lab. We ended up putting gaffer tape over all of them to try to keep people from tripping over them and putting chairs on them and all that.
But then you had to have a token ring card in your computer.
Yes, you did.
But that was an RJ45 connection that went to a token ring, or no? Was it an actual?
They may have made an RJ, not when we were doing it. There was no such thing as RJ45.
So was it a really big card in the back of the computer?
Oh hell yeah! It was a big full size card, and it had a Twinx connector on it. So it had like a port that was like a mic cable almost the size of it, and you plug it. It was a Twinx, and it had two outs.
Yeah,
and it was actually a little bit bigger than it had a British.
And two outs because you could daisy chain computers into the ring. Yeah, I forgot about that actually.
No, it was crazy. It looked like a milking machine. It had cables everywhere. It was insane. Yeah, it was literally nuts. That Twinx but it was robust. It was designed to survive the end of civilization.
It was.
There'll probably be some, after we are all gone and the seas have covered the earth, there'll still be Twinx connections somewhere.
Yeah, like I think like Ethernet cables, if you run over them too many times with your chair, like they can mess up. I didn't feel like that was the case with token ring.
Twinx, Twinx was tough. It was it was designed for factory application. And,
I see.
Very tough. Now, ThinNet was not, even though it was. ThinNet was very much like you back the chair over it or set a table edge down it or something, and it would just squish it, and then it just quit working. The whole network, the whole building.
That was in the OS2 article too. Was that at the end they say, "Oh, it's surprising to find that OS2 is still supported," even though. Oh, here's the article. Actually, it was funny. IBM dropped support for it back in the day. Oh, so OS2 runs on the subway system in New York City. Some old ATM machines still were using it. In 2006, IBM discontinued the operating system and sold off OS2 support to Serenity Systems, which was later acquired by Arca-Noea. So, like, even though IBM discontinued, another company picked it up.
Or IBM is famous for, putting stuff out there that's going to be out there for a long time.
Even if they don't support it, they're going to outsource the support.
They made these promises. It was like when when the AS400 came out, they made a promise that no matter how many years pass, how many new versions come out, these old versions will still work. You'll still be able, if you have skills, you'll still be able to use them. And it was crazy. They were always,
that's still. AS400 is still used today.
No, it is absolutely. It's called J series now, but it's I
gotcha.
Yeah, but it's and so and I haven't used one, but theoretically, if you had old skills from OS400 like back in the
still transfer
90s,
over.
you should still be able to sit down a J series machine and work on it.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. But that's IBM.
I'd like to see a tutorial on how you do stuff with it.
What, with the J series?
Yeah, that'd be a pretty.
Oh, it's an awesome computer. The AS400 is an absolute beast. It's a very, very robust. I really.
They were a workhorse and a half, and they were not that big.
Well, it was scalable though. So a 650 12-way was like monstrous, but those little ones were like desktop
I had little
computers.
ones.
They were like a desktop computer. Yeah,
they were power PC. They were power PC.
Yeah,
chips
but they made big ones too. The 650 12-way was like huge.
Massive,
it was like the size of
like a
van.
refrigerator. Yeah, or a van.
Oh, it was big. I mean, a 650 12-way was a really big one. But they made it was completely scalable for whatever you needed, from little desktop size machines all the way up to ginormous refrigerator.
The desktop one I had in the late 90s was a power PC chip in them. I don't know if they still use PowerPC, but
they were EBCDIC when I used them. So
yes,
when I worked them, they were all EBCDIC, and so they were all 7-bit bytes, and it was a whole different model. But they had their own built-in database, DB400. They had RPG built into them to
DB2,
run.
DB2 was it DB2 or was no?
No, it was DB400,
which was different from IBM's DB2.
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
DB2 was what they ran on the mainframe system. This was called a mini computer, so it was a different, target audience. Even though it wasn't.
DB2 would run anywhere, though. Eventually.
DB2 was, they even had that on PC.
They still have DB2? People still run DB2 databases?
Sure they do.
Raise your hand if you still have a DB2 database.
Let us know. We'd like a copy of that as well. Especially if you have it in Slovenian.
That's right.
All right.
Oh, just before we close out, woo-woo. Tyler, describe to us, and for us youngins, what woo-woo was.
Tyler's eating. Dinner time.
Is that like we can't talk about woo-woo? Is it like Fight Club?
Woo-woo's like Fight Club, man.
First rule of woo-woo.
It kind of was like Fight Club, to be quite honest. Like,
I mean, you can look at the Wikipedia. It's the billion dollar hacker club it's like one of the loft groups, kind of the same time era. It's a lot of the same people, founders from Napster, WhatsApp. They do a lot of interesting things.
It's not still active today.
Or if look at that look.
If it is, we can't talk about it, is what Tyler's
look at that look. Yeah. There's a meeting at his house later.
That's right.
It's going on right now behind that background.
But was it like a think tank? Did they do vulnerability research or?
All the above. Working group. They help in a lot of
I think working group is a good description. It was definitely like all those early like working groups of people that were collectives that just wanted to get together and explore this stuff and did just about everything.
I'm fascinated now because I remember it, but like I don't know if I could pick out anything significant from it in my recollection.
It is also, just for reference purposes, an alcoholic beverage made of vodka, peach schnapps, and cranberry juice. Just for reference purposes.
Interesting. Tyler's not saying much.
It is also a line of hair removal and intimate feminine care experts.
He got the T-shirt at the reunion, and he can't talk about it.
I think you've had that question answered. Yes. Or the unanswered question has answered your question.
With that, hey, that will conclude this version of Paul's Security Weekly. Moral of the story: don't talk about woo-woo. Over and out.